Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It is just about 1 o'clock, and I think we are still waiting for a few of our work group members. So we're going to give it a few more minutes before we get started with our agenda. Hey, Rose or Ali, have you had any updates from Kimberly today?
Up now, Margaret.
Okay. All right. I know I was in touch with her last week. I know this was on her calendar. So just
Yeah.
maybe we'll give it another minute. I see we've got a lot of board members here today, which is great.
Yeah.
But just want to make sure we have our work group members as well. All right, I see we've got Robert, Sally, and Sean. I'm going to just ping Kimberly really quickly, and then we'll go ahead and get started with the agenda. As I said, I know I was in touch with her last week, and so I know this was on her radar, but she may have just had a delay. So give me just 1 second to see if I can tag her, and then we'll get going. All right, it's about 5 after 1. Ali, I'm thinking we'll probably go ahead and get started. If you agree, we don't have Kimberly yet, but I did send her a message and am hoping that she'll be able to hop on soon.
Yep. Sounds good, Margaret.
Great. And so to kick things off, I guess I'll take it away with the agenda. First off, want to say welcome to our work group members, Robert, Sally, and Sean. I also see a number of other board members here as well. So thanks everyone for attending. I know I'm going to forget someone probably. I see Greg Clauser, Bill Grop, um, Bonnie Luisi. Are there any, and Andrea Lara, I think as well. Are there any other board members in attendance that I missed?
Bye. See ya.
Great. That is a great group. Thanks everyone for attending. We have about an hour and a half agenda today. We really only have one major report for the work group to review, and we wanted to leave adequate time for questions and discussions related to that report. Um, I will note the work group chair, Kimberly Hendricks, has not yet joined, and the work group does not currently have a vice chair. So Ali, what is your recommendation with regard to approval of the meeting synopsis? I guess maybe I should ask if there's any one of the work group members who would be willing to pinch hit today as vice chair.
Good shit. I've done this a little bit before, so.
That's perfect, Robert. You'll do great. Thank you.
All right, so we have the agenda in front of us. We don't need the agenda approved, right? We just go to the minutes.
Yep, just the synopsis, yeah, from the May 14th meeting. Yes.
I'll give whoever's voting a minute to go over the synopsis, then I'll entertain a motion to accept the synopsis in a second.
Looks like we had Sally and Greg there, that meeting. Would either of you be willing?
Sure, this is Greg. I'll make a motion that we accept the minutes as written.
This is Sally. I'll second that.
All right. The three of us, all in favor of accepting the synopsis as written, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? I don't think so. That carries. Let's move on.
Great. Thanks so much, Robert. So jumping on to the next agenda item for the work group, this is sort of a little bit of housekeeping, and also sort of, I think, just periodically falls under the category of it's every now and then a really good idea to sort of take a look at the charter for all of our work groups and subcommittees and make sure that the wording still sort of aligns with the way the work group operates and the scope that the work group is covering. So I'll preface this by saying this this version that you have in your packet today is a redlined version of the current charter. I want to acknowledge up front, I know that work group members may not have had a whole lot of time to read and digest these red lines. So I'll walk through kind of the major updates today. These are proposed updates. And if the work group feels ready, you could, by consensus, approve these updates to the charter today. If you'd prefer to take a little more time to review and consider the updates, it's absolutely fine for us to bring this back for consensus approval at the next work group meeting. So that all said, I'll start to just note, and I'll highlight kind of the main areas where we made what I would consider to be sort of substantive changes. You can see throughout there are some changes that just kind of relate to wording. Some of the things are around consistency. For example, the existing charter used the terms work group and committee kind of interchangeably, and so we've updated to make it say work group throughout. In terms of the purpose and scope, the existing charter referenced the triple aim in terms of the work group's focus. And we propose an edit to revise that to multiple aims so that in addition to improving population health, improving patient experience of care, reducing cost of health care, we would also include advancing health equity. Next page, please. Great, thank you. Additionally, some further updates we're proposing under sustainable cost. The existing charter had language that referenced slowing the rate of premium growth to consistently come in at or under 3.4%. And we proposed a slight update to that to sort of align with the focus of what the work group has already been doing in terms of managing the rate of premium growth in an effort to align with the annual 3.4% cost growth cap. So just an acknowledgement that you know, an effort to align with is a little bit of a different approach in terms of consistently coming in at or under and sort of setting our sights. Further down under the category of partnership, Sally, yeah, would you like to respond or have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. In changing that language in an effort to align with, is it still, we're still bound by that 3.4%, right? So it doesn't
Yes.
change.
Yeah, the
That's
charter
just
does
changing this.
not change that, but I think it's in recognition that the boards often have to consider multiple approaches to reach that 3.4%. It has not always been feasible to kind of maintain everything the same and consistently come in at or under that. There have had to be various considerations around things like benefit changes, consideration of reserves. And so I think noting that there is effort associated with that was sort of the goal of that, that update. Absolutely open for, you know, if there's wordsmithing or, you know, language updates or alternative phrasing that the work group wants to consider, that is certainly possible.
Okay, just clarifying, it's not changing the way we operate. It's just making the language reflect more accurately what we do, right?
Yeah, kind of trying to make the language exactly better reflect what is happening in reality. And then similarly, to kind of likewise reflect what we're already doing. Under partnership, we have expanded some of the language around collaboration to identify, you know, legislative and executive bodies, as well as OEB and PEB advisory groups. We've been, and there's a little bit more specific language further on in the charter that references those advisory groups, but, you know, other PEB and OEB committees like the Strategies on Evidence and Outcome work group, the Health Equity work group, as well as the OEB Advisory Committee and PEB Member Advisory Committee, and those types of groups that we have already been consulting with and collaborating with, but sort of more specifically noting that in the partnership section. Next page, please. And then I would say this is perhaps maybe the most notable change in the language that exists in the charter. So to date, the existing charter has been has itemized or listed specific non-voting members who would participate in the work group, including a member of the State House of Representatives and a member of the State Senate. And we're proposing updated language that would note participation from members of the legislature as non-voting members is welcome. The situation we've been in for some time now is that we haven't actually had members of the legislature specifically appointed to participate in this work group. So this change, the intention is to note that while we, you know, absolutely welcome that participation, it's a little of a different approach than specifying those seats as membership seats on the work group. And I will note retaining language that or further clarifying language up in that top bullet point that each board appoints 2 members to the work group, and the boards have the option to appoint additional members to the work group as desired. We currently aim to have 2 members from each board, but there's certainly room for additional board members at the table as interest and capacity allows. And then if you could go to the next page, please. And then the last update, just under the relationship to other governance groups section. Here is a little more where we've added some additional descriptive language around other groups that we coordinate and collaborate with to inform work group efforts as necessary. Here specifically where we include a little bit more specific information about work groups and also OHA committees engaged in healthcare innovation and cost sustainability. So that summarizes the major changes. I will pause for a moment to see if the work group is interested in through consensus approving these updates, if the preference is to have a little more time to look at these and bring them back next month, that is certainly also fine as well. So looks like Sean has his hand up.
Yeah, as far as I recall, I mean, I think I helped co-write some of these originally, back in the day. So, these all look like fine changes to me. We were just putting it together originally. So we've evolved. And so, yeah, it's a little clearer and so on. So from my point of view, I would be good with it just now, but that's my 2 cents.
Great, thank you.
This is Robert. I think the changes are fine. I view them more as housekeeping changes than anything that changes the purpose or the scope of the group.
Great. And Sally and I see Kimberly has joined. Hi, Kimberly. Welcome. Great to have you with us. We're just going over the updates to the charter, their proposed updates. I had noted that depending on work group consensus, you could either approve these updates today and we could carry them forward, or if anyone on the work group is feeling like they need more time, we could bring them back at the next meeting and allow folks a little more time to review what's proposed.
Go ahead.
Being a newer member, I don't have all of the history, but I will lean on those who've come before me. I mean, I think it looks good. So if those who've been here for a little while agree with that, then I will trust that.
Great.
This is Greg. I agree as well. And I guess if we need a motion, I motion that we accept the changes in red as written in the new charter to update the charter.
Yeah,
Great.
that's just Sean. I'll second. It's probably good to just take a vote and be done with it.
Great.
And I'm sorry. Do you just want to keep being in charge? Sorry, I'm running a prison. I have no life. I've literally went from one meeting to another. I sat down and I went, oh my God, I'm supposed to be somewhere again. And so if you just want to keep on running.
That's great. Yeah, you're totally fine. And Kimberly, I knew that was the case, so was not at all worried. So yeah, but thank you. Thank you for being here. So I guess real quickly, Robert, since you had done such a great job with the initial stepping in to serve as chair, do you want to go ahead and on this agenda item and just call for a vote?
I'd be happy to. So we have a first and a second to the motion that we adopt the changes in red on the proposed charter document. All those in favor say yes.
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 Yes, or aye.
Yes.
Any nays? Any abstentions? The motion passes.
Great. Thanks, everyone. All right, we've got one more quick agenda item just to take a look at our most recent update to the draft work plan, and then we will move on to the major report for today. Neither of these next two agenda items require any specific work group action, just informational. But you can see in front of you the 25-26 draft work plan for the innovation work group. I think, as most of you know, these work plans evolve depending on board needs and other work in process, and sort of where the work group's focus lands. So we always note that this is our plan moving forward, and that there could be further updates or adjustments as warranted. You'll see today we went over the charter. We're going to review a follow-up report related to hospital cap compliance. Then in our next meeting will be in December, the very beginning of December, and Mercer will be preparing some reporting looking at leveraging OEB and PEB purchasing power. That is expected to be something that will be looked at over the course of a couple of meetings. The other agenda item that we'll have in December will be the 2024 update of OEB and PEB level of payment. That is the reporting that specifically looks at how much OEB and PEB are paying for various types of healthcare services and how those payments compare benchmark to Medicare. Looking ahead in January, end of January, the first meeting of the new year, Mercer will be preparing an update to some hospital monitoring report that they prepare on a typically an annual basis. This looks at hospital and payments and utilization broadly. So not just, today we'll be looking specifically at payments to capped hospitals. The hospital monitoring report looks more broadly, including not just costs, but utilization across all hospital services. And then we will also begin to look at monitoring for Garner Health. So OEB, with the new plan year starting tomorrow, OEB members are going to begin to have access to the Garner Health program to help them identify top providers and receive reimbursement for cost sharing when they seek services from those providers. PEB members are soon to follow, with that benefit going live on January 1st. And within the innovation work group, we will be reviewing options and discussing an approach for monitoring Garner program utilization and analyzing program impact. So we'll start that in January, and that will be something that we will continue to come back to during the course of the year as we build up more claims history and more utilization of that benefit. Looking ahead to spring, the March meeting, we have a continuation of the work related to leveraging OEB and PEB purchasing power. I think we will certainly be further fleshing that out in the coming months. And then we get to May, we will be looking at a hospital cap compliance update again in May. Specifically, we'll have more information on 2023 and 2024 results. And you'll see in today's presentation some specific aspects of hospital cap administration that we're going to be looking into and coming back to you in May with recommendations. Noted for fall 2026, a couple of topics that are on the list. We will be considering, any insights from the PEB RFP. I think that's one thing to note occurring within the next, coming months, is that PEB is currently in the midst of a medical RFP, And I do anticipate that, we'll learn some things through that process. That's typically the case with any large procurement. And so I think the innovation work group will certainly have some conversation around, lessons learned or ideas identified. And then also noted for fall potential further work on either updating or possibly developing new performance targets and guarantees. In the past, the Innovation Work Group has played a big role in developing both the premium and cost trend performance guarantee and the behavioral health network standards performance guarantee. And so, I think fall, about a year from now, will be a good time to take a deeper look at whether updates or adjustments or new guarantees are warranted. So that is an overview of the work plan for the next roughly year. That being said, should new things emerge, for example, things during the legislative session or outside of that might require some deeper research and analytics for OEB and PEB, I think the Innovation Work Group certainly would be a venue where that work could be done to help inform the boards on any topics that require attention. So I will pause. Are there any questions about the work plan? Great.
Yeah,
Well,
this is Sean.
Go ahead, Sean. Yeah.
Maybe at some point, not necessarily right now, but a little bit of the history of the committee. It's a relatively newish group as they go. And the purpose originally was there were thoughts in some of the legislative body that OEB and PEB should be merged into one entity, and we were like, hold on, there's a whole bunch of things. But what we can do is we can work together, to find efficiencies, which is what they were trying to put. That was why they were talking about that. And that seemed dissatisfied. And so with that, I think we have grown towards that in various ways. And I think we have two things where we compare notes a lot. I mean, more than that, but those are formal. One is this Innovation Work Group, and the other is the CIAL, which I think has really it started very much more of an OEB thing, and it still is, of course, but we have PEB, we show up and we participate and consultants and so on. So I guess I would maybe want to talk about at some point how those two things, because they both have a deep dive into data as one of their abilities. You're not going to get into that level of detail at a board meeting probably, because we get really far in the details sometimes, which is good. That's the point. But both committees kind of do that. And so I'm wondering if maybe we do a side by side, or like, how does this agenda flow compare with the CIAL, like, are they different topics? Are we both addressing hospitals at the same time, or we're taking it a slightly different tactic, that sort of thing? I think the Innovation Work Group's point is particularly focusing on those items where both boards could make a similar decision, or have some kind of intervention that would affect both boards in order to kind of maximize. But still, even then, sometimes this, CIAL comes up with ideas and it's like, oh, that's pretty good. And so then both boards end up doing it. So I'm just throwing that out there, maybe for a little crosswalk as to which one does which thing, and same topics, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll certainly make note of that and identify some ways to bring that forward. We definitely do, when looking at the work plans and kind of what's on each committee's plate. we work to ensure we aren't duplicating. COW tends to, not 100%, but they tend to look kind of more at existing programs, how existing programs are performing. They do things through like the summer research group where they are identifying opportunities for new initiatives or benefits. The innovation work group tends to work on things that are a little bit more longer term and perhaps a little more policy focused. When you think about things like price caps or you know network models and things of that nature. Not 100%, but the innovation work groups topics tend to be a little bit more at that policy level as opposed to OEBs and the COWs topics tend to be a little bit more at kind of the PEB and OEB specific program and benefit level. Ali, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, thanks, Margaret. Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say that's a great comment, Sean. And, having CL kind of take on PEB as well is still fairly new. So I think, we're still kind of trying to make it work. So as Margaret said, so we don't have any duplicate or crossover and make everybody's time as efficient as possible. I think I've always viewed it as more future focused in innovation work group and see I was a little bit more immediate plan design and new programs. But yeah, I think IWG is also seen as kind of the incubator for, the 3.4% statute and strategies, and how to address that. And not just in the future, but in the current upcoming plan year.
Those are useful distinctions. Yeah, that works. That's interesting. Okay, thanks.
I just want to check in. I did see another hand up and I think it went down. Were there any other questions on this topic?
Crew, that was me. That was Misty. I was just concurring with Sean. And so the descriptions you just went through were really helpful. So thank you.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Misty. All right. Well, no work group action is needed specifically on this work plan. So I think we're ready to go ahead and move to the next agenda topic. I am going to pass things over to Emery Chen, who will kick us off and walk through the hospital payment cap compliance review.
Thank you, Margaret. Yes, so I am Emery Chen. I'm actuary with Mercer, working primarily with PEB as well as the Innovation Work Group. Glad to see all the participation from the board members. This is definitely a lot more than I think what we typically have, but it's great to see you all, and thank you. So what we wanted to go over is really taking a look at one of the main, I guess, things that the IWG does, which is to look at compliance with the hospital cap. So with the hospital cap, we're referring to the 200% of Medicare regulation. That's from Senate Bill 1067. So what we wanted to do here was to kind of recap the work that we did earlier this year, as well as kind of talk about what we have found and where we want to go in the future. So actually moving to the next slide. All right, one more, please. Thanks. So this presentation, it's going to be kind of, I don't know if it's not really data heavy, but it is going to be very informationally heavy because there's a lot of detail and a lot of specificity around how we essentially measure compliance with the cap. So we want to talk about exactly, what it is and why it actually should matter, or it matters to both the OEB and PEB boards and IWG. Talk about what the work essentially entails, and then essentially kind of provide some information to the IWG and the other board members so you can see where potentially it could go, and some of the findings, as well as some learnings and potential thoughts for where more detailed analysis could be for this hospital monitoring cap. So that's the intent of the presentation. Hopefully, we'll go through this, and if you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt, ask questions. I don't think we've necessarily have gone in like the detail that we're going to probably go through in this presentation in terms of hospital payments and things like that. So, if you do have any questions, please feel free to ask, because hopefully it provides a good information so that you can understand why we are recommending what we're recommending for the next few steps. Okay, moving on. So just some background here. So in May, and we reviewed the 2022 and 23 results from the hospital payment cap. So the cap is, as mentioned, part of Senate Bill 1067. It takes a look at claims that were paid for OEB and PEB by the different plans and compares to the claims in aggregate as well as individually against against what Medicare would have paid. And based on that, we also compare whether it meets the 200% cap, which is for those specific DRG hospitals, and the payments for inpatient and outpatient services at those facilities. So, we take a look at this, we take a look at the claims, and what we do is we find out whether the payments have been made in accordance with the 200% of Medicare cap. We're going to revisit those results and then talk about some lessons that we have learned, some differences that we have seen, and where we want to go potentially for. Okay, next slide. So why does this matter? So we have a few reasons here why we think this matters and why the IWG takes a look at this, and we believe the boards should keep their eye on this as well. So the main one is to really, there on the bottom left, ensure that the payments meet the cap. I mean, that's essentially the charge that's in the regulations, the rules, and so that's part of the work that we're doing. But there are other uses of this work, as you can see based on the work plan that Margaret presented on the IWG. There's kind of variants of that, and this report is a variant, but it also does a lot. It looks at things in a similar basis, but a little bit differently from some of the other reports. But they're really important to take a look at historical results, comparing year over year to see how the savings are. This report is definitely more granular than I think a lot of the other reports are, because it is potentially done on a claim by claim basis. We can look at it on a claim by claim basis, so we can be very, very specific as to where the savings are happening, where the savings aren't happening, and how payments are compared to the 200% cap. With that granularity, we can also look at the carriers and see how their payments match up or are different. There are, I think, some definite differences here and there in the results. And so doing this work allows us to look much more deeply at those payments and, just to, see how the carriers are administering and see how the carriers are administering by the different hospitals, different facilities, different types of services as well. And then the one on the bottom right, there are current rules, and Margaret will be going through those rules later on, but there are also potential, considerations around those rules. Could there be some changes to the way the rules are written? The rules are written in a certain way. And if you read the legislation from Senate Bill 1067, there are some differences in there. And so potentially, the way that the rules are being written, the way that the Senate bill was written, are they meeting the needs of OEB and PEB in terms of meeting this cap? And so, some of the things that we have looked at, hopefully will, shed some light on that and to maybe spark some discussion around whether maybe some changes to the regulation, to the rules might be needed. Any questions before we move on? Okay, next slide. Taking a look at essentially the data and how the review is done. This is going to get, I don't know, it's not really numbers heavy, but it is very, I guess, detailed in some ways. Uh, you, if you have questions as to some of the things we talk about, please ask. But what we do in essentially in paying at Medicare levels, when we talk about, what would Medicare essentially allow for services, it varies depending on the type of payment that's being made. We have the two listed here, which are essentially covered under Senate Bill 1067, which are the outpatient hospital payments, as well as the inpatient hospital payments. And they are paid a little bit differently. I think some of the terminology or some of the ways that these things happen or payments are made are probably going to be intuitive, especially if you look at your EOBs or, it's working through some of the things, board items, but just a little bit more detail on how these payments are made relative to Medicare. So for outpatient there on the left, there's the Outpatient Prospective Payment System, or OPPS. Those are based on what are labeled ambulatory payment classification codes, or APCs, and those are grouped into different categories, different types of services based on essentially resource use, on clinical and cost similarity. So they are kind of priced similarly. Each code has a fixed payment rate. CMS and Medicare uses APC, but a term that you're probably more familiar with are CPT codes. And those essentially are what APCs are. So when you talk about, if you go to an office visit and you have like an established patient for like a 60-minute office visit, that's going to be 9 something something something, and that has a specific payment relative to what the plans pay, as well as relative to what Medicare would allow. So that's essentially it for outpatient hospital payments. There are other things like medically administered drugs or lab services. Dental and vision actually have essentially these APCs or CPT codes. Those payments, well, if they were done in the facility, that's subject to the 1067. Those would be allowed at essentially a maximum of 200% of Medicare. Inpatient hospital on the right. So those are done a little bit differently. They're not necessarily done by the claim by claim. They're more done by essentially admits. So those admits is priced based on inpatient prospective payment system, or IPPS. They are based on essentially DRG codes. So what they do is they take a lot of the diagnosis, the claims, to essentially group into a DRG. So those would be, let's just say, like newborn, or, deliveries, or heart attack code. There's under 1,000 of them, but they're DRGs, and those are grouped based on clinical and cost similarities. So the different types of, like if you have a transplant, potentially there's a complication, major complication. Those different MCCs and CCs are different DRG numbers. So they do get paid at different rates, but they are essentially, grouped together. So they are, if you take a look at them, they're in the rows similarly, but they do have different costs and different allowed amounts under Medicare. There are other things like outliers that can be applied, but generally it's the same payment regardless of the length of stay. And a little bit of information down below on how often they're updated. So they're generally annual, but there are some more frequent updates for minor adjustments. Okay, any questions or comments? Okay. Next slide. So that's how Medicare does it, but how do the plans pay? So this is specific to Kaiser, Providence, and MODA. And so we asked them questions about how they pay for outpatient and inpatient. There on the left, all of them essentially use Medicare-based methods, OPPS and the APC. So, when we match up, when we take a look at the claims information, we should expect it to match up pretty well against Medicare. It's for outpatient. Outpatient in the past had been paid significantly higher than 200%. And so when the cap came in, a lot of the plans, a lot of the hospitals went to essentially straight 200% of Medicare. And so we do see a lot of matching between each specific outpatient service and the 200% of Medicare cap. We have some information a little bit later on in terms of the overall payments for outpatient. It is very close to 200%. I think it's like 198 or something like that percent of Medicare. So that there is definitely a lot of, I guess, consistency and consistency across, I guess, the hospitals, across the different types of services, as well as the different plans in terms of payment there. On the right, inpatient hospital payments, Kaiser and Providence, based on what we talked with them about, they do pay essentially based on Medicare methods. They do essentially regroup. They group the claims, the diagnosis codes and stuff like that to come up with the admit and the DRG, and they pay based on that. MODA does do it a little bit differently. They take the claim that the hospital submits and pays based on that. They do take a look at some DRGs afterwards. They do, we ask them questions. They look at higher cost admits to ensure that upcoding doesn't happen. And they do some retrospective grouping on their own to review to make sure there isn't upcoding going on generally. But they do pay based on the DRGs that are submitted by the hospital. So it is a little bit different from Kaiser and Providence in that case. Inpatient hospital payments, they are lower than 200% Medicare. There's some differences. Historically, maternity admits were not paid anywhere near 200% Medicare. Medicare doesn't necessarily price out maternity cases because maternity is not really usually a big service for those who are 65 and older. But one thing that we did see when the 200% cap came in was that there were a lot of really high increased payments. There were some rules put in to bring it down to the lesser of language for billed, allowed, or contracted. And so that did bring down the overall payments there. But there's definitely more variance in terms of hospital inpatient admits in terms of percent of Medicare, and the overall payments is lower than the outpatient amounts. Okay. Any questions? We'll move on. Okay. Next slide, please. All right, so how does Mercer take a look at this? So when we do our analysis, we take a look at the claims. We have the data reported by the plans into what we call the Meredith data set. And so that has essentially all of the claims that were paid for, billed, paid, submitted for OEB and PEB. What we do, we have Meritive, who contracts with Wakely, which is a consulting firm that does Medicare repricing, and they append essentially the price that Medicare would have paid to the data for OEB and PEB. So once that is done, we take a look at it and essentially look at the amounts that were allowed by Medicare, and then compare it for outpatient, inpatient, by hospital, and other things to make sure it's in alignment with the 200% Medicare cap. When we did this work for 22 and 23 back in May, we found a few issues in the data, a few discrepancies. And some of these discrepancies, hopefully our path forward can help solve this. But we did notice this in the stuff that we had done. Some DRG admits did not necessarily match those with those that were essentially paid for. The ones that were created by Meritive did not match essentially what it was paid for. There's some reasons for that. In terms of groupings, weren't done necessarily at the same time or on the same DRG programming. So that was a little bit different. And also there was St. Charles Redmond was an A and B hospital. It essentially got merged or taken over by St. Charles Bend to become a DRG facility. That was in 2023, and so the timing on that kind of maybe made the data not as clean as it could have been. And so we did see some discrepancies in the payments between St. Charles Bend. Some of those were St. Charles Redmond, and the payments, depending on when they were paid, did not necessarily match up with what matching up with the 200% Medicare cap. So there were some issues that hopefully we can resolve, but those were some things that we had found. Okay, next slide. So that's the data and the process of how the Medicare repricing happens. So what were the results? And so if you were listening part of this meeting in May, these are essentially a summarization of what we presented then. We are taking a look at 22 and 23 here, and we have it by different breakouts. So up at the top left, we have OIB and PEB separately for 22 and 23. So in aggregate, these DRG facilities, as a percent of Medicare, paid essentially 189 or 190% of Medicare for OEB, and it's a little bit lower for PEB at 182. When you take a look at between inpatient and outpatient down below, you can see that outpatient is closer to 200%. Inpatient is a lower amount. For OEB, the outpatient did increase from 195 to 196% of Medicare. And then bottom right, this breaks it out a little bit further by the 3 different plans. So taking a look at this, the payments in for OEB for MODA were about 192 or 193%. Kaiser's 181 or 178, depending on the year looking at for OEB. And then PEB, you can see there on the right, MODA's about 174 in 2023, and then Kaiser's a little bit higher, 178, and Providence is higher, still at 185 in 2023. So these are essentially what the allowed amounts were as a percent of Medicare. They are kind of, steady between 22 and 23, a little bit of erosion, I guess, where it does go up a little bit for OEB, 190%. So while that sounds, pretty good in aggregate, keep in mind that on the next slide, please, that, percent of Medicare means what Medicare's allowing for that year. From year to year, from time period to time period, Medicare does increase. So the allowed amounts, there's a trend to that unit cost. We're showing inpatient hospital market basket amounts here. You can see that straight line's at 3.4% limitation, but you can see historically where CMS has been allowing increases in the Medicare allowed amount. And as these allowed amounts increase, the payments that OEB and PEB pay do increase if that percent of Medicare remains steady. So the fact that it's 195 to 196, it's only like 1 point. But between 22 and 23, if you take a look at the trend, that's where the bump happens. So the allowed amounts for Medicare, the unit cost was above that 3.4%. It got up to about 6% at the end of 20 or sometime in 22. And so that does essentially increase the cost quite a bit and impacts what OEB and PEBS pays. And so, without any efficiencies, without switching to like lower cost facilities or anything else, if everything remained the same, it's very difficult to meet that 3.4% when the underlying unit cost is above that 3.4%. So while, that kind of hopefully illustrates the need to, some of the further, work group topics that we're doing, ways to drive efficiencies, ways to create savings. Because if we don't do that, as trend keeps going up year over year, that 3.4% is going to be very difficult for OEB and PEB to meet because if the unit costs are increasing by at least 3% per year, you only have 0.4% in terms of services or cost sharing or membership change or whatnot. The risk of the members getting worse from year to year. So, you're not having newer members come in. So those things definitely erode, the costs compared to the 3.4% limitation and results in things where, unfortunately, plan changes might need to be made. Sean.
Emery, that I don't know if yeah, I was just gonna ask, you may not know off the top of your head. Do you have a ballpark sense of what percent of the overall PEB costs are subject to the hospital cap? Like, is it 40% of all of our costs are somehow caught up in this, or is it like 10%? Just like gut ballpark.
Yeah, I want to say, if I remember correctly, Margaret and James, please correct me on this. I want to say your first number was actually pretty close. I want to say it was in the 40%. It is, I think, much more significant percent of admits. I think it's closer to 70, but the overall cost, I think it was like in that 30 to 40% ballpark. Margaret, I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, Emery, just so my recollection, and I don't know that we've updated this number for the most recent year, but I do think that about somewhere in the range of 60 to 65% of all hospital is happening in capped hospitals. Now, Emery, I'm blanking on what percentage hospital specifically is of our total spend. Um, but it's, about 65% of whatever percent hospital represents of our total.
Yeah, generally, the prior rule of thumb was like 1/3 inpatient, 1/3 outpatient, 1/3 professional for medical services. Pharmacy is obviously like 20% of that. So 60% of 80% makes you about 48, and then 2/3 of that's probably in that lower 30% range. So that's the rule. I don't know. That's our guesstimate for now, Sean.
Yeah, that's close enough. Just trying to get a, you know, ballpark of how much it weighs
Yeah.
on the overall 3.4% cap when Medicaid costs go over, like how hard does that make the overall 3.4%, I think the answer is much harder, but there's a more precise mathematical way to say that. So, thanks.
And it does vary by the different plan that you have, right? Kaiser's in essentially the Metro I-5 corridor, which their facilities are generally subject to the DRGs or to the cap. If you have more rural areas, those are not. Those critical access hospitals are not subject to the cap. So the payments will differ, and the impact of CMS will differ in contracting. But
Yeah,
hopefully that provides some context.
not to split hairs, but just trying to get your arms around the size of the thing, right? Because it's 65% of the hospitals, but that's not to say 65% of our members go to those hospitals. It could be way higher, because many state employees, and this would be different for OED, right? So many state employees would go to the, I-5 corridor type hospitals. We're just talking about like how much do certain costs weigh on the total bottom line, right?
Yeah.
And then so that could actually be quite a different story for OEB. I don't know. So it's interesting.
And we'll have like further breakouts in some of the other presentations as well. So I just don't have them on the top of my head right now. Sorry. Okay. Any other questions or comments before we move on? Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. So other findings in terms of the hospital cap monitoring in 22 and 23. There were some low volume hospitals. So basically, hospitals that had just a few payments, few admits, few not that many outpatient services. There were a few that did cross the 200% threshold, but most of them were at below 210%. So we are talking like maybe tens of thousands of dollars at most for essentially most of those hospitals. So there were a few that kind of just like the variation. I don't know if it's just whatnot, but it was a little bit above the 200%, but not significantly so. But that's for hospitals in total, and especially for the low volume hospitals. When we take a look at on the claim by claim level, there's definitely more where claims are being potentially paid above 200% of Medicare. A lot of those were just slightly above, maybe down due to rounding. I think in general, about per year, I want to say about like 20 to 30,000 claims were above 200% of Medicare. That may sound like a lot, but considering the number of outpatient facility services, which are in the hundreds of thousands for both OEB and PED per year, that's not nearly as much. But there were definitely some that were above 200% of Medicare. But as the if you take a look down at the bottom, the regulations currently, the rules currently say that compliance is determined in aggregate for inpatient and outpatient at the hospital level. There were some claims that were a lot of claims below 200%, and so those claims below 200% offset those that were above 200%. And so overall, those facilities were paying, meaning meeting that 200% threshold, and the plans were meeting that. So generally, things were pretty good, especially in 22. But in 23, there's one hospital that we mentioned earlier, the St. Charles, where the payments ended up being above the 200% threshold. And so as we were digging into that, I think that's where a lot of our learnings came from, a lot of the reasons why we're going through this presentation right now, because I think there's definitely ways to improve to make sure we're measuring compliance correctly in this case. And so what we are recommending there on the right is that for 22, there really wasn't the issues that we saw in aggregate for hospitals. It was 23 that we saw the issues, so we recommend closing out 22. But that doesn't mean that we're going to necessarily close out 23. We want to potentially revisit 23 in this case. But that's our current recommendation for 22. I guess I will leave it for any questions before I move on to other updates for 23 and 24. But just wondered if anyone had any comments or thoughts. Okay. Next slide, please. So one thing that we looked back at was to improve essentially the percent of Medicare that's being calculated in the Merit database. So the way that we had done it essentially used the already grouped MSDRG values, so those for admit inside the Merit database. What we found was that the timing Meritive wasn't really their core business is not repricing Medicare. That's why we went out to they have the relationship with Wakely. That's why we use Wakely to reprice to price the Medicare. There's potentially the way that Meritive does it isn't necessarily the way that I think would match up best for what we might call a hospital claims audit. And so what we're potentially recommending is essentially taking all the claims and letting Wakely run groupers on the data. So basically, they would be essentially rerunning claim by claim and pricing out exactly what they think should be the correct DRG, the correct APC payment for each of those claims. So this was, I think, something that going into our work that we weren't, acutely aware of, that we might end up with this little bit of a difference if we did give the entire data set over to Wakely to reprice. But there is definitely a way for us to essentially get a claim by claim repricing that should improve the accuracy of our analysis. And so that's actually what we're starting now, and what we recommend for looking for 23 and 24. Let's actually move to the next slide for where we have some more questions. So this is the evolution. So I think I kind of talked about some of these points before. So what we want to do, we talked about closing out 22. That is, a little bit more historical. The rules are the rules, and it looked like generally payments were fine. But we suggest revisiting 23 especially because of the discrepancies we're seeing in the St. Charles Hospital, and doing our 24 analysis that we're essentially required to do, and we'll be doing for May of 26. So basically, this would be a full repricing on the OEB and PEB claims data. The process, because it is, essentially 8-9 months from now, we would have time to look and resolve and those price or data discrepancies to make sure we have that as we go through and do the presentation in May. And then we can also report compliance on a more refined basis and in more, I guess, that we have more confidence in that we are, if we do find an issue, that there is potentially an issue there, because we are essentially would be doing a full repricing, looking at each specific claim. I think based on Medicare pricing rules at the time, there would be a lot more accuracy that we could do and a lot more detailed, deeper dives and more specific analysis we can do on that basis. And with that, essentially, if we do find some issues, or if we take a look and see, if it's on a claim by claim basis, that I think our prior analysis said about there's maybe $10 million paid for OEB and PEB separately that might have gone over the 200% Medicare cap. If we do this type of analysis, we'd be able to specifically say, with pretty good accuracy, this is the amount that PEB and OEB are paying above 200% of Medicare for each individual claim that doesn't meet that threshold. And so with that, it might help guide some decisions, might help guide some additional analysis or, asks to, potentially find those efficiencies to match the pricing a lot closer to 200% Medicare and to, maybe find some savings potentially for OEB and PEB. So that's our suggested evolution. Sean, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, maybe this is a question for Ali, but what are the potential corrective actions at that point? Like, can we ask for our money back, or what's the deal?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think in order to change any statutes, we would have to go through the legislature and ask, request changes on language, which opening up the statutes is usually a last resort and can enter some risk to that. But we have control over rules. There's a process on that. But yeah, go ahead.
I guess my point is the law says they can't charge us more than that, but they did.
Mhm.
So can we just be like, well, you broke the law, so give us the money back?
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like, you
actually-
overcharged us.
Yeah, actually, Sean and Ali, can we and Rose, can we go 2 slides? Or is it 2 or 3 slides? Let's move up a couple slides.
Sure.
Not just one more, please. Okay, Margaret, you want to take this?
Yeah, perfect. I was gonna say Sean is so good at reading minds and knowing what's coming next, because I think and here's where we kind of want to level set in terms of what our administrative rules currently say. And so to kind of go back in history, some of you may remember, so OEB and PEB drafted and filed administrative rules related to the hospital payment cap back when this policy was implemented. So this was back in 2019 and 2020. 2020, there was a correction or an update to the rules essentially filed specifically related to some of those issues we were seeing around maternity claims and ensuring that the rules specified payment at the lesser of the 200% of Medicare cap, carriers' contracted rates, or billed charges, so that we weren't seeing all of those claims automatically being paid at the ceiling. But in looking at what the rules do say in terms of compliance, for self-insured plans, our rules require that TPAs refund payments above the cap for self-insured plans. And for fully insured plans, they require that carriers essentially apply any overpayments as a credit to the fully insured premium rates. But the way that compliance is looked at under the current rules is at the hospital level. So for each carrier, we look at total payments to the to a given hospital. And as long as the total payments in aggregate are at or below the 200% cap under our current rules, that meets the requirement, the standard for compliance. Can you advance to the next slide, Rose? I do want to note that compliance framework, when we put that into place back in 2019, we were a lot less technically capable in the arena of Medicare repricing and auditing on these types of things. A lot of progress has been made in the past 5 to 6 years in terms of repricing in comparison to Medicare. So when you look at the rules as written, again, they're looking at compliance at the hospital level overall, combining inpatient and outpatient together. We know there are differences in the actual level of payment between inpatient and outpatient. But if you look at it by this measure, the historical data shows that from that compliance framework, the cap's being met. However, there are instances where payments at the outpatient only level exceed the cap, or where at the claims level, individual claims may exceed the cap. And so part of our proposal for this next body of work is to basically, as Emery said, reprocess 2023 data and 24 data and review compliance through a couple of different lenses. So in line with our current rules, but also look at it, looking at inpatient and outpatient levels separately by hospital, and then also looking at the individual claim level and determining if there's an acceptable margin of error that should be considered for any overpayments identified under each approach. The idea being that, like, if some percentage of overpayments are truly like rounding errors, it may be administratively burdensome and costly to audit at that level. So the goal is to really look at compliance, some more granular frameworks for compliance, and identify what the right, and I'll use the term right kind of generally, but kind of right sizing the approach so that we're looking at the right level of precision and at the right level of aggregation to ensure that we aren't having situations where basically overpayments are occurring and not being recouped. So I'll pause there. I think what the plan that's kind of at hand is that this work for 23 and 24 is really already underway in terms of looking more granularly at approaches to compliance. And we expect to come back to the work group with recommendations for how to potentially revise the compliance process, which would require rule updates. We would need to amend PEB and OEB rules, but to ensure that we are doing managing the hospital cap at the most precise level that is feasible. Is I guess how I'll characterize it. And Emery or Kimberly, I see you have a hand up. Welcome other thoughts or comments.
Well, I just have a question. I think it'll be interesting to see if we find that the overages that are more seem egregious or something, maybe those are going to be a certain hospital or a certain, is there going to be some demographics involved or that kind of thing? I don't know that answer, but it'd be interesting to see if it is just, if you take a penny and you have so many, eventually the pennies all add up, but it'll be interesting to see but it's costly to do these kind of audits. It's laborious.
Yeah. But you're absolutely right. Part of the intention will be to look for patterns or common occurrences or anything like that can help us refine our compliance framework.
Yeah, and that's definitely the case. I mean, it is, with this, actually, if we move 2 slides back up, or those 2 slides back, this additional, this updated analysis, updated repricing is hopefully going to give us the ability to really dig into, you know, again, dig into the data with a confidence that allows us to state whether, if we can find those issues, Kimberly, that you're talking about, if it's any sort of patterns with any specific hospital, inpatient, outpatient, any type of service, as well as, plan potentially, if there is something that's being noted that we can see that is an issue, and if this essentially overage or overpayments above 200% by claim is a consistent issue for certain types of services or anything like that, if there is a need or a way to potentially save money for OEB and PEB, because to meet, I guess, the letter of the legislation, this analysis will hopefully show that, and we will get that data and bring it back to you, bring it back to the IWG and the board members back in May of 2026. So we can look at that, come up with the analysis and findings, and then hopefully recommend, I don't know if necessarily have to recommend a path forward. We may be keeping the same, but if there is a way to improve things, come back with that potential path forward for the IWG to approach, which, if it is changing the rules, it's another process. And, there will have to be additional follow-ups in that case. But hopefully, hopefully this makes sense to you. Hopefully you're in agreement and feel like this is a worthwhile use of IWG time and effort, and that, I don't know, I guess it's just trying to make sure that we are stewards, right, of what the payments are outward, and that, if there's potential savings to be had, that we approach ways of maybe trying to achieve that. This was actually our presentation. So with that, I think I would like to open up again to everybody for any questions, comments. We do not have any more slides, but definitely would welcome thoughts. But as the other, we are starting work on the repricing because it is a process, and it does take some time, and so we are working on that, and we will be making our best efforts to meet the timeframes and come up with that analysis and discussion. Go ahead, Kimberly.
So is most of this automated, or is this chart pulls where people have to review, or is it all just automated coding?
So in terms of the repricing, I think Wakely has their automation where they can take in the data. I mean, it's going to be a lot of software and data work on that. But once it comes back, there's definitely a lot of work on the Mercer end, because each specific claim in the database has a Medicare allowed amount appended to it. And so what we have to do is we basically have to pull off the information. Since we're going to do it on a claim by claim basis, we need to essentially pull all of those claims, right? And then take a look at that and then aggregate it up based on the hospitals and other things to come up with reports. So that does, I mean, it's not really automated. I mean, we did it for the first time last time. I think we'll be more efficient this time. But it is definitely a process, and where the process really kind of gets bogged down is when we start diving into the specific issues, into specific findings, or the things that seem odd that we want to look into. So that's hopefully where, it's going to take more time, but hopefully that's where we add the value and come up with something. I don't know if any actions actually needed on this, but we just wanted to, I guess, make sure that everyone on the IWG is okay with the process, or don't have any concerns, I guess, maybe with what we're proposing or recommending that we move forward with. But definitely appreciate your time. Appreciate the comments. And if there's nothing else, I guess I'll turn it back to, I don't know, Margaret, to you or Robert.
Yeah, I think that brings us almost to the end of our agenda. We do want to check in and see if there's any public comment. I'm not aware of anyone signed up. Rose, have you heard from any public commenters?
No public comment.
Okay. Any final questions for the group? Seeing none, I guess I'll turn it over to Robert to adjourn. Or I guess.
Well, and thank you,
Sure.
Robert. I appreciate you covering for me. I really do.
Well, I can just say, meeting adjourned then.
Great. Our next meeting is December 3rd, and information will be coming out to the work group in advance of that meeting so that you're all aware of what's planned for the agenda.
Thank you all so much. Take care and have good
So-
holiday, right? We got Thanksgiving then before we meet again.
I know.
Or trick-or-treating, Halloween, all that fun stuff. So,
Hard to believe that time of year is here. Yeah.
yep. So, all right.